Good afternoon, everyone. And the first item of business this afternoon is portfolio questions. And in order to get as many people in as possible, I would prefer if you could have short and succinct questions and answers to match. Please, question 1, James Dornan.
To ask the Scottish Government, progress has been made in discussions with the UK Government on repatriating the annual £1.4 million of red meat levy income paid by Scotland's farmers.
Thank you. Cabinet Secretary Richard Lockhead.
Given that this serious issue has been ongoing for far too long, the First Minister recently wrote to the Prime Minister to seek his support to repatriate the levy that rightly belongs to Scotland. I can inform the Chamber today that the Prime Minister has now responded to that letter, unfortunately declining our request. A decision which I know will disappoint the whole of the Scottish red meat industry, all of whom are unanimous in their view that Scotland's producers are being shortchanged. Nevertheless, Quality Meat Scotland have cautiously accepted an invitation from the DEFRA Minister of State to join a forum to determine spending priorities for the disputed levy income. However, rather than making new and spurious arguments that the lost levy is somehow benefiting the Scottish industry, I think, and I hope the Chamber agree, that the UK Government would be better focusing on putting right this wrong.
Thank you. James Dornan.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Given the negative response of the UK Government to this issue, one where the Scottish Government has the support of both Quality Meat Scotland and the National Farmers Union of Scotland, does the Cabinet Secretary share my disappointment that the Prime Minister is unwilling to change tack on this extremely important issue when Scotland is so clearly losing out?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think there will be a huge degree of anger across the livestock sector in Scotland, particularly at this time where this levy income is desperately needed to promote the Scottish brand, so that their producers can have a greater return from the marketplace. And as James Dorman said in his question, it's estimated we're losing £1.4 million of red meat levy each and every year over the border. So that's for animals born and reared in Scotland, but the promotional levy, because the animals are slaughtered over the border, is promoting produce from outside of Scotland. That's a ridiculous and unacceptable position, and I really believe it's indefensible, and I'm very, very disappointed, as is the First Minister and the Scottish Government, by the Prime Minister's response.
Thank you. Claire Baker.
There is certainly a need for discussions on the distribution of the red meat levy, but if we are looking for a solution, surely we also need to understand how this situation has come about. The availability of abattoirs in Scotland and the competitive trading that there is within livestock are certainly some key factors. What can the Scottish Government do to support that there are more viable options available within Scotland?
Secretary.
Claire Baker actually raises a very important point, which is that because of the reducing and concentration capacity of processing throughout GB, this means that more animals are going over the border to be slaughtered south of the border. There are a number of moves afoot to try and increase the number of processing in Scotland. However, as the member will know, this largely relates to sheep, and we have very little processing capacity in Scotland for lamb. That is a long-standing issue, unfortunately. Due to a number of other factors, given the closure of Vion, etc. Now that's an issue for the pig sector, but there are moves afoot to try and address that particular species. So we are working closely with the red meat sector to see if we can increase capacity in Scotland, but nevertheless we have a very flawed formula here, which is putting Scotland at an unfair disadvantage, and that's what should be fixed.
Alex Ferguson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I have to say I'm broadly in favour of the principle of a review of how this levy is both deducted and distributed. But I do think the Cabinet Secretary has been tempted by going for the easy headline without thinking through the full consequences of this, which could include losing the benefit of up to £7 million a year that's ring-fenced for promotion and research on British meat. But can he explain, he mentioned the forum that has been offered to be set up by the UK Minister of all the meat levy raising bodies. Can he explain why he has so robustly dismissed the benefit of that forum, given that it would have a remit of looking at all of these issues and determining the different priorities within the UK?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I first point out to Alex Ferguson that there have been reviews in the past. There was reviews several years ago, and unfortunately the recommendations have not been acted upon. Also, in terms of the new spurious argument which only came onto the scene a few months ago, this has been a dispute and a debate that's taken place for several years, and now we have this new argument from the UK Government trying to defend the status quo in terms of the levy arrangements, that somehow Scotland benefits from UK spend. We want to promote the Scottish brand, secure the Scottish premium for red meat, not the British. It's a Scottish premium and a Scottish brand, and that's what has to be promoted, and that's why the current arrangements are flawed. In terms of my response to the new forum that's proposed, what I said at the time and what I continue to say is that I would be very, very concerned if this was yet another fudge and simply a talking shop just to soak up time and allow the current arrangements to stay in place for a bit longer at Scotland's disadvantage.
Thank you. Question 2, Nanette Milne.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had regarding calls to reopen the market for Scotch beef in Japan.
Cabinet Secretary.
Last November, I led Scotland's biggest delegation of food and drink businesses to Japan and China to promote our fantastic larder to those exciting and very lucrative markets. However, I was extremely disappointed to hear from the UK Embassy that gaining access for Scotch beef to the Japanese market was not a priority at the time for the UK Government. I've since wrote to the UK Secretary of State to ask him to prioritise this, but hope we can see more progress in the near future. Of course, if Scotland was an independent country, we'd be able to decide our own priorities, our own priority markets, and take the necessary actions to help our red meat sector.
Thank you. Nanette Milne.
I thank the Minister for his response. The potential beef market in Japan is significant if the import ban is lifted, and I do think that early moves to promote our world-renowned Scotch beef there could be of significant benefits to farmers here. I believe the Japanese Food Safety Commission has recommended the easing of restrictions on beef imports to allow animals of 30 months and younger to be imported from this year. So I wonder what further steps the Cabinet Secretary will be taking with his counterparts in Japan to try and help secure this market, and what preparations have been made by the beef industry to promote Scotch beef in Japan.
Cabinet Secretary.
When I was in Tokyo, I recall speaking to a top chef in Tokyo, remember a city of 30 million people, who told me he believed the best beef in the world came from Scotland, and he wished he could source it so he could serve it to the tables in his own restaurant in that top Tokyo hotel. So there's certainly a demand for the Scottish product, and that's why I have been doing what I can to make representations to the UK Government to make this more of a priority. There is a questionnaire that's been with the UK Government for some time from the Japanese authorities that requires to be filled in, and hopefully that will be returned very, very soon, and we can indeed get this ban lifted and get Scotch beef onto the top restaurant tables in Japan and, of course, elsewhere in Asia.
Thank you. Question 3, Alison McInnes.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what progress it has made in distributing financial support to farmers who experienced losses due to extreme weather earlier this year.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government has made a total of £6.5 million compensation available, and I confirm that more than £730,000 has been paid to around 4,100 farmers. This will meet almost half the costs incurred in the collection of fallen stock that had died because of the severe weather in March to May this year. The remainder will be used to meet eligible claims arising from over 1,000 applications received under our Weather Aid Scheme, with payments starting in the next 10 days.
Thank you. Alison McInnes.
I'm glad to hear that you're suggesting that the payments will start in the next 10 days, but there has been a sense that you have been dragging your feet a little after that. We are approaching winter. The Cabinet Secretary, I'm sure, will agree that it is vital that the Government processes the Weather Aid Scheme payments without any further delay and gives farmers that certainty. Can you give me some idea of what percentage of payments will be made in the next 10 days?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm happy to send the member some of the rates that were in the application documents, because clearly every case will be different. But the compensation scheme will cover all livestock in terms of the species affected, so people can claim for both cattle and sheep, etc. I have to pick up on the member's comment that the Scottish Government is somehow dragging our feet. We are dealing with a very complex, difficult situation faced by many farming businesses, and of course we have to also meet state aid rules. I understand that the industry are very understanding of the time taken, and indeed it's a steering group involving industry members that are driving this Weather Aid Scheme forward. If the member thinks that we're not doing enough in Scotland, perhaps you should look south of the border and look at the anger amongst English farmers about the lack of support they've received from the Conservative Lib Dem coalition government in that country.
Thank you. Question 4, Fiona MacLeod.
To ask the Scottish Government what mechanisms are available to enforce nature conservation legislation regarding marine protected areas.
Cabinet Secretary.
There is currently a marine planning consultation underway, and that includes proposals for marine protected areas and details of how MPAs might be managed to protect habitats and species. The main legislation for designation and management of the MPAs is the Marine Scotland Act for inshore waters and the Marine and Coastal Access Act for the offshore area. The Marine Scotland Act includes powers to make marine conservation orders to ensure the conservation objectives of an MPA are met. The Act also includes powers to set up management schemes to help ensure that everyone knows which features are being protected through either statutory or voluntary measures.
Fiona MacLeod.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, and I wonder if he believes that the development of new technology will play an important role in helping Marine Scotland and enforcement officers ensure continuingly effective compliance and enforcement arrangements.
Cabinet Secretary.
It's an interesting point that Fiona MacLeod raises. It's certainly something that Marine Scotland are taking seriously, and how new technology can be used in terms of taking the marine protected areas forward. And of course, in terms of fisheries management, Scotland has very much helped blaze a trail in terms of the use of CCTV on fishing vessels and also sensors on equipment and fishing vessels, etc. So this is something we're giving a lot of attention to.
Thank you very much. Claudia Beamish.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary explain why activities that have been identified to have a negative impact on the protected features of an MPA can still be allowed to happen within some parts of that same MPA? And how will this facilitate recovery of our seas? Clyde Sea Sill proposed MPA is one such example where demersal fishing may continue in some parts of the site.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, in each case where a new marine protected area is being proposed, that will be accompanied by a management plan, and that will have to be proportionate but effective, and it will be based on scientific evidence. So whilst I would welcome more details about the members' concerns about that particular proposal, I can assure the Chamber that we're taking a very sensible way forward to ensure we balance, on the one hand, the impact on marine industries, but on the other hand, making sure the MPs do what they're meant to do, which is protect the marine environment.
Jamie McGregor.
Thank you. How do ministers ensure that the views of fishermen are fully considered when MPAs are proposed?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the way in which we've approached the Marine Act and the identification of marine protected areas in Scottish waters north of the border has been highly praised, and very much in contrast to the situation south of the border, where the stakeholders feel that Scotland's gone about this the right way, and perhaps there's lessons to be learnt by the authorities south of the border. So I am confident that the interests of fishermen have been taken into account, and indeed they have been involved fully in the whole consultation process to get us to where we are today.
Question 5, Anne McTaggart.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it is meeting its targets to reduce air pollution.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
Whilst there are still some hotspots of poorer air quality in a number of urban areas, we are meeting both domestic and European air quality targets across much of Scotland. The Scottish Government is working closely with SEPA, local authorities, Transport Scotland and other partners to address these issues, and we recognise we must build on achievements to date and continue to take action to improve air quality. That's why I welcome the report on Scottish emissions of several key air pollutants published today, which shows substantial reductions in emissions for all the pollutants since 1990. This is further confirmation that we have made significant progress in addressing poor air quality, but we are committed to continued action to ensure this positive trend continues.
Anne McTaggart.
Thank the Minister for that response. I'm sure he will be aware also that recent studies of the subway system in Glasgow have highlighted dangerously high levels of air pollution and a concentration of tiny metallic particles that are well in excess of recommended safety limits. In light of this discovery, what actions has the Scottish Government taken to reduce levels of pollution and increase air quality for the commuters in Glasgow?
Minister.
Well, the member raises an important point, and clearly we have an objective to try and make sure that all of Scotland meets the required standards. Glasgow is not expected, obviously, to comply until after the 2015 deadline, as I'm sure the member knows. The whole of Scotland is expected to comply with the limit values by 2015, based on a combination of current and planned measures, with the exception of one road stretch, the missing link of the M8 between Newhouse and Baillieston to the east of Glasgow. Within the Glasgow city area, there are expected to be no exceedances of the limit values by 2015. So we are making progress. We do have that one stretch of road to deal with, which affects commuters to Glasgow, but we are planning to tackle that. Transport Scotland estimate completion of that stretch of road in 2017-18, and once the upgrade is complete, emissions along the road will also comply with the limit values.
Thank you. Alison Johnson.
Thank you. Edinburgh's air quality management areas were extended this year because pollution targets are not being met. Edinburgh Council now has a plan to cut pollution on Leith Walk by investing in walking and cycling, and they've asked Transport Scotland for a £3 million contribution. Will the Government contribute an appropriate portion of the Forth Road Bridge underspend to tackle the air pollution the new bridge will cause?
Minister.
Well, I run up against portfolio boundaries here in terms of allocating spend from the Forth Bridge, but I take the serious point that Alison Johnson makes, and I'm happy to meet with her to discuss the particular issues in regards to Lothian and see how we can take forward action to tackle the AQMAs in in the Lothian area, and I can always make representations to my colleague Keith Brown about use of those funds.
Many thanks. Question 6, Richard Baker.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to promote food recycling.
Secretary Richard Lockhead.
Since 2011, our Zero Waste programme has provided £20 million to councils across Scotland to support the rollout of food waste collections. This action means that by February 2014, 1.2 million households will have access to a food waste collection service. In addition, the waste regulations passed by Parliament last year will mean that the majority of households and businesses in Scotland will have access to a food waste collection by the end of 2015, with many receiving this service by the end of this year.
Richard Baker.
Thank you. As the Cabinet Secretary said, the Zero Waste Action Plan identifies the contribution food recycling can make to reducing landfill usage and greenhouse gas emissions. Can you tell me what national targets have been set to increase food recycling, what monitoring of progress is being made to any goals which have been set, and what action ministers are taking to increase food recycling, not just in individual households, but across the public sector, where there's huge capacity for increase of food recycling in those areas?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. The overall target for recycling is, of course, 70% by 2025, and food waste has got a contribution to make to that. There are no specific targets for food waste recycling, but as I indicated in my answer, there are regulations in place which will mean that effectively by 2016 that all local authorities in Scotland will have an obligation to have a waste collection service to non-rural homes. Therefore, I expect clearly all local authorities to be playing a role in collecting food waste. And of course, the best way we can all contribute towards this is just to finish the food in our plate, as I've been doing regularly throughout Scottish Food and Drink Fortnight.
Thank you. Question 7, Jamie Hepburn.
To ask the Scottish Government what guidance it provides to local authorities on gull management.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
Gulls, like all wild birds, are protected by law. However, the law provides for licences to be granted to manage birds where there is a need to do so for reasons including the protection of public health and safety and the prevention of the spread of disease. The Scottish Government recognises that urban gulls can pose real problems for residents and businesses and works with local authorities to try to develop solutions. This work has included commissioning a report on managing urban gulls from the British Trust for Ornithology, which is available on the Scottish Government website, setting up a task force to look at innovative solutions in the Dumfries area, including the use of falcons to displace nesting gulls, in the report entitled Dumfries Gull Report, Use of Falcons to Displace Nesting Gulls from an Urban Area. That is also available on the Scottish Government website, and providing direct advice on gull management through Scottish Natural Heritage, as was done in 2012 with Highland Council.
Jamie Hepburn.
I thank the Minister for that answer. In the Kilbrain and Greenfalls area of Cumbernauld, people's lives are being made a misery by the presence of a significant number of gulls, with some constituents being reported that they've been attacked. The Minister mentioned the Dumfries initiative. Does the Scottish Government share my regret that North Lanarkshire Council have refused to consider implementing such a scheme or any long-term strategies to deal with this issue, despite the concern of a considerable number of my constituents?
Minister.
Well, I certainly do recognise the distress and disquiet it can cause to members of the public when such incidents can occur. There's currently no requirement for local authorities to have an action plan in place to deal with problem gulls. However, it is expected that local authorities across Scotland will be able to implement the recommendations of the Dumfries Gull Report to help reduce this problem in Scotland, and I would certainly encourage the local authority in this case to take up that opportunity.
Thank you. Question 8, Maureen Watt.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when it last met fishing representatives from the north east of Scotland and what issues were discussed.
Cabinet Secretary Richard Lockhead.
Whilst in Fraserburgh for the Cabinet meeting on Monday the 2nd of September, I jointly hosted a fishermen's surgery which was attended by around 50 very vocal fishermen and industry representatives. We discussed a wide range of issues such as the reform of the Common Fisheries Policy, the allocation of fishing opportunities, the current state of the stocks and details of the £6 million support package that I recently announced to help the industry during these pretty tough economic times.
Okay, Maureen Watt.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. He may be aware that Aberdeen City Council is undertaking redevelopment plans that will result in the move of fish processors out of the Union Square area, with no clear indication of where they should move to. This may impact on the critical mass of fish processing companies in the city and disproportionately on the community of Torry, where there are many other processors and where the vast majority of workers live. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that fish processing does and should continue to play an important role in the economy of Aberdeen?
Secretary, briefly, if you could, please.
Well, Aberdeen, the great city of Aberdeen, of course, was built on its relationship with the sea, and I certainly believe and hope that fish processing continues to have a role in the local economy in Tory and throughout the city of Aberdeen. In terms of the relocation of the existing businesses, it's primarily an issue for Aberdeen City Council, but if Maureen Watt feels there's a role or input required from myself as Fishing Minister, I'd ask her to contact me about that.
Many thanks. And we now move to Justice and Law Officers' questions. Question 1, Jenny Mara.
To ask the Scottish Government how many times a Procurator Fiscal's recommendation to proceed on solemn procedure has been rejected by the Crown Office since 1999.
Lord Advocate Frank Mulholland.
The process to which the member refers to is not carried out by Crown Office but by independent Crown Counsel. There is a long-standing convention where in certain circumstances the Procurator Fiscal seeks Crown Counsel's instruction on whether a case should be prosecuted and, if so, in what forum. It's not uncommon to commence a case in solemn procedure petition and for that case to be reduced to summary once further investigation has taken place. In each of the last 3 years, the numbers of such decisions have been 1,764, 1,865 and 1,789 respectively. I am unable to provide a figure in relation to what forum for prosecution has been recommended by the individual preparing the case for prosecution. This data is not recorded in a searchable manner in our IT systems, and to obtain this data would require manual examination of thousands of case papers within the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, and this would be entirely disproportionate.
Jenny Mara.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. So if I understand the Lord Advocate correctly, this kind of negotiation between local Procurator Fiscal and the Crown Office occurs very frequently. He cited figures that were in between 1,500 and 2,000 times. What is the criteria for a local Procurator Fiscal's decision being reviewed by the Crown Office? What's the criteria for that?
Well, it's not really a criteria for a decision being reviewed because the decision's not been taken yet. There's a process whereby the case is investigated at a stage by the Procurator Fiscal. There are many reasons why cases start out in petition. For example, it may be that the Procurator Fiscal wishes to investigate more serious charges, and that's part of the solemn process. It may be, for example, that the Procurator Fiscal wants to hold an identification parade or needs a warrant for samples or wishes to judicially examine or for a judicial declaration by an accused. And it's all part of the process where ultimately independent Crown Counsel will assess a recommendation, assess all the circumstances and then take a decision as to whether proceedings should be raised and if so, in what forum. So that's a process which has been going on for hundreds of years in our prosecution service in Scotland. It may be that you're alluding to an issue about who takes the decisions, which member of Crown Counsel takes the decisions in perhaps high-profile cases whereby there are allegations of criminal conduct by an MSP. What I can tell you is that, as confirmed by the Crown Agent in March of this year in a letter to the Justice Committee, where there are allegations against MPs or MSPs or members of staff of the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, that decision is not taken by law officers at all. They won't see the papers. That decision is taken by independent Crown Counsel. So I hope that allays any concerns that you or others may have, but that is the process. It's a process which works, and it's a process which has been carried out for a long period of time.
Many thanks. Margaret Mitchell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Is it not the case that regardless of what procedure is used for domestic abuse cases, for example, zero tolerance of domestic abuse is being let down by zero sentencing? Does the Lord Advocate consider it acceptable that nearly a third of those convicted of domestic abuse in 2011-12 were admonished in court and 12% were handed a custodial sentence, and the vast majority of these were for less than 6 months, given the concerns that Jenny Mara has raised today?
Lord Advocate.
Well, I thank Margaret Mitchell for that supplementary question. As you will appreciate, it's not appropriate for me to make any comments about sentencing. That's a matter entirely for the courts. If I disagree with a sentence, when I say I mean Procurators Fiscal Crown Council, then if we can do something about it, we will. There are procedures for us to, for example, take an appeal on the basis that the sentence is unduly lenient. But beyond that, I do not comment publicly on sentencing. I should add that I have been concerned recently about some of the comments which have been made about the Bill Walker case. This is a very sensitive period of time because he's not been sentenced, and it's very important that all members are careful in any comments, that they cannot be seen to be a direct or an indirect means of influencing sentence. Sentence is entirely a matter for the court. Due process will be carried out on the 20th of September when the Sheriff, who's heard all the evidence and has got the background reports, will apply or impose an appropriate sentence.
Thank you. Question 2, Paul Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when the Cabinet Secretary for Justice last met the Chief Constable of Scotland and what matters were discussed.
Cabinet Secretary Kenny MacAskill.
Well, I met the Chief Constable on Monday when we both spoke at the Alcohol Focus Scotland National Licensing Conference in Glasgow. The last formal meeting, however, was 22nd August, at which we discussed a number of issues relating to the policing of Scotland.
Paul Martin.
Presiding Officer, following the Cabinet Secretary's discussions with the Chief Constable, I wonder if he could advise me how many registered sex offenders remain unaccounted for in Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I don't have that information because, as Mr Martin will know from previous matters, these vary on a weekly, if not daily basis. But these are matters that are monitored by the police, but I will ensure that a full detailed matter is sent to Mr Martin.
Thank you very much. Question 3, Alex Johnson.
To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of the court capacity following the implementation of its court closure policy.
Cabinet Secretary.
The assessment of court capacity was made by the Scottish Court Service, which is now an independent body corporate under the leadership of the Lord President. SCS consulted on a range of proposals to use their estate more efficiently. Proposals to close courts required the approval of ministers and were considered by the Justice Committee. The Sheriff Courts, which have been scheduled for closure, account for only 5% of the overall business in the Sheriff Courts, and the Scottish Court Service is satisfied that this business can be readily accommodated in the receiving courts for all of those courts which are being closed. SCS have assured me that they've done a thorough review of business trends, and they and the Lord President are confident that the court closure programme will provide a court structure fit for the 21st century and which supports the reforms which are being done now and which are planned for the future.
Alex Johnson.
The Courts Reform Bill will transfer significant business from the Court of Session to Sheriff Courts, which will put even greater pressure on those courts that have survived the Government's cut programme. How will the Scottish Government ensure access to justice is maintained in the North East, given that Forfar and Aberdeen Sheriff Courts, which are already busy courts, will have to absorb business from Arbroath and Stonehaven, as well as significant extra work from the Court of Session?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, these matters have been fully factored in by the Scottish Court Service. The Lord President appeared before the Justice Committee and made that clear, exchanging answers. In terms of the business for Stonehaven in particular that's being transferred to Aberdeen, it might be useful if I reminded Mr Johnson of that business. There were 4 jury trials in 2011-12. There were 11 civil ordinary actions in which a debate on legal matters proceeded or evidence was heard, and there were 2 summary cause or small claims proofs. There is capacity at Aberdeen, and it is on that basis that the Scottish Court Service have looked at matters in the face of unprecedented budget cuts being forced upon the Scottish Government, which impact upon the Scottish Court Service, efficiencies and actions required to be made, and the Scottish Court Service is satisfied that, notwithstanding the financial constraints upon them, that Aberdeen and indeed Forfar will be able to cope.
Graham Pearson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary mentioned a programme of courts closures.
would he be good enough to share with us, is he aware of any ongoing conversations in the lead up to any new phase of closures for consideration in the future?
Cabinet Secretary.
No.
Margaret MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I wonder, can the Cabinet Secretary say whether or not the court closures has a knock-on effect on the number of hours that police officers can be expected to be there as potential witnesses or whatever? Because I would imagine that that wouldn't help the morale just now. And I would like him, when he answers me, also to tell me whether or not he said any reports of morale perhaps being not what it should be in the old Lothian and Borders area.
Many thanks. Cabinet Secretary.
Well, first of all, the Scottish Court Service, I can give an assurance, do discuss these matters, obviously, with Police Scotland. Equally, the fact is that trials are scheduled and the officers' availability is factored in and matters are being dealt with there. With regard to the morale of officers in Lothian and Borders, I can say I am certainly not aware of that. I meet with officers on a regular basis, both the local inspectors and indeed officers that I bump into. I can, though, raise it with the Scottish Police Federation, who I will be meeting tomorrow, but I have to say so far it does seem to me that morale in Police Scotland is remarkably high.
Many thanks. Question 4, Kezia Dugdale.
To ask the Scottish Government what steps Police Scotland is taking to reduce the number of accidents involving cyclists due to dangerous driving.
Cabinet Secretary.
This is an operational matter for the Chief Constable of the Police Service of Scotland. However, I can say that the Chief Constable has confirmed that he is committed to improving road safety and reducing road casualties. It's one of the force's top 5 priorities, and more emphasis than ever before is placed on pursuing this aim across the whole of Scotland.
Kezia Dugdale.
I wonder whether the Cabinet Secretary is aware of the deep and widespread concern held by Edinburgh's cycling community about the Government's Nice Way Code campaign. Given that concern and the high number of cycling fatalities over the past few months, I wonder whether the Cabinet Secretary would meet with the Minister for Transport with activists to discuss these campaigns and perhaps review the Nice Way Code.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the Minister of Transport and I do discuss matters regularly, indeed recently met with the Association of Police Superintendents. I am aware of the concern within the cycling community of Edinburgh. I did meet in my capacity as Justice Secretary with those who had lost a recent loved one in a main high-profile incident in the city of Edinburgh. And indeed, I also met with another constituent who had lost a relative in another incident that happened out with the city. So I'm aware of the huge concerns, the grief and trauma that is caused. I do know that this is a matter that is viewed significantly by my colleague Keith Brown, and doubtless it will be a matter that he and I, whether together or individually, will discuss both with the Chief Constable and indeed, though I can say, with Superintendent Murray, who's in charge of the road policing unit, who primarily have responsibility. But I can give you an absolute assurance that whether government or police, we recognise the tragedies that happened and that work has to be taken and indeed is ongoing.
Sarah Boyatt, briefly, please.
What advice has been given to ensure that sentencing policy is appropriate given the rise in the number of accidents which have resulted in the deaths of cyclists in the last year?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, it would be inappropriate for me to give any advice on sentencing until such time as we do have the Sentencing Council up and running. This is entirely a matter for the court to take the decision. Clearly, though, you will be aware that there is a matter ongoing that is clearly sub judice, but in which an appeal was taken by the Crown because it was felt that a matter was unduly lenient. I have to say I have full support for the Crown and endorse their actions there, and it's a matter that the court will decide upon and deliberate upon very shortly.
Many thanks. Question 5, John Wilson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what issues were identified in the latest inspection report on Lanarkshire area of Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service and what progress has been made on those.
Lord Advocate.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Appropriate action has been taken in the 7 suggested areas for improvement and the 6 recommendations from the inspection report in the Lanarkshire area published in May 2010. In 2012, the Crown Office Procurator Fiscal Service restructured into 4 federations, namely West, East, North and National, which incorporates the Scottish Fatalities Investigation Unit and various other specialised units such as Health and Safety and Wildlife and Environmental Crime. The previous Lanarkshire area now forms part of the West Federation. The Crown Office Procurator Fiscal Service has fully embraced the use of technology to improve the preparation of cases. We continually review the practices and procedures to identify where improvements can be made. For example, the Inspectorate made recommendations in respect of the disclosure of evidence. The method by which disclosure is made has been reviewed and radically changed since 2010, and all defence solicitors across the country now have access to online disclosure, which allows statements, photographs, documentary productions to be shared electronically, and this ensures that an accurate record is kept of all disclosed material.
Thanks. John Wilson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank the Lord Advocate for his response? But can I ask the Lord Advocate what is being done to deal with the issues in relation to continuations which were identified in the 2010 report, and whether or not management are dealing with those issues in an appropriate manner?
Lord Advocate.
Thank you for that question. I think you rightly raise a matter of concern to the Inspector in 2010. It's commonly referred to as churn in the summary courts across Scotland. I should point out that the responsibility for tackling churn lies with all court users, not just the Crown, and the 2010 Inspectorate report made this very point. The Crown has been proactive in its response. Initiatives include holding surgeries for solicitors to discuss pleas with Procurators Fiscal, writing to solicitors in all summary cases advising what plea will be acceptable to the Crown from the outset of the court process, the provision of summaries of evidence again at the start of the court process, and creating secure email and online disclosure for defence solicitors. Also taken steps to improve witness attendance at court with the introduction of a successful pilot witness texting service, sending text reminders to witnesses to attend court. I have no doubt that all these initiatives have contributed to a reduction in churn in our summary courts. National statistics collated by the Scottish Court Service show that trial diet churn has decreased by almost 4% in the last 3 years. That's not being complacent. There's more work to be done, and Procurators Fiscal will be at the forefront of that work.
Many thanks. Question 6, Drew Smith.
To ask the Scottish Government which police stations are being considered for closure or a reduction in counter opening hours in Police Scotland's review of police station service delivery.
Cabinet Secretary Kenny MacAskill.
Well, this is an operational matter for the Chief Constable of the Police Service of Scotland, but this Government is committed to protecting and supporting frontline services. 1,000 more officers have been recruited, recorded crime is at a 39-year low, crimes of handling an offensive weapon are at a 27-year low, and a reduction of 60% since 06-07. The new 101 telephone number is operational for the reporting of non-emergency incidents, and of course 999 for serious incidents and emergencies. Contact can also be made through email, social media and call points.
Drew Smith.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that very comprehensive answer, including social media for reporting crime. Over the summer, the Chief Constable wrote to members about Police Scotland's review into the number and opening hours of police counters in police stations, and the Chief Constable specifically highlighted the budget he's been given by Mr MacAskill. Given the concerns about backfilling, which have also been well aired in this chamber before, can the Cabinet Secretary confirm whether any Glasgow police stations are on a list for reduced services, and can he tell us what is his priority, since it appears to be neither the back room nor the front counter?
Well, our priority is maintaining those 1,000 additional officers, continuing that outstanding record of a 39-year low. I think Mr Smith forgets that the review is looking at the level of public service that occurs at police offices, not necessarily closing police stations. That will, though, be a matter for Mr House to consider, and ultimately for a matter for the Scottish Police Authority. In the interim, this Government will continue its support in making sure that we have that visible police presence in our communities, making Scotland safer than ever before.
Brief supplementary for John Pentland.
Can the Cabinet Secretary guarantee the Chamber that when proposals come forward that consultation will take place, will previous consultations be borne in mind, and will local people be given the opportunity to voice their concerns at public meetings?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think I recognise that Mr Pentland was not a committee member or cited on justice, but these are now matters for the Chief and ultimately to be held account to the Scottish Police Authority. If Mr Pentland or the Labour Party wish to change that constitutional structure, then doubtless Parliament could review it. But at the present moment, it is not a matter over which I have any rights or powers. I believe that was the right decision made by Parliament, and I stand by that, but Mr Pentland may care to raise it with the Scottish Police Authority.
We now